Okay, so hello and welcome back. Today we will be discussing the third property and the fourth property. Okay, so let's start with the third property of absolute values. And the third property states that if you have, let's say you have two numbers A and B, which are being divided. Now, if you take the absolute value of the two after their division, and if on the other hand you take the before the division you take the absolute values of them, the answer is just going to be equal. Okay, so we're going to do an example to see if that actually is true or if I'm actually making something up. And it's actually quite nice because when you actually do an example that proves the property, then we're actually like, okay, so first of all, the property is correct, and the second thing is that yeah, it actually works, right? So let's actually see. So first we'll try to solve the left hand side. We're actually going to do the division over here. So -4 divided by 2, what is that going to be equal to? Yes, that is going to be equal to -2. Now the absolute value of -2 is going to be equal to 2, right? Because any number, it's going to like have the absolute value, and even a negative number has, after going through the absolute value stuff, is going to be equal to a positive number. In this case it's 2. So let's do the problem on the right hand side. Now the absolute value of -4, that is going to be equal to 4, and the absolute value of 2 is going to be equal to 2. Now let's say we divide 4 divided by 2, right? So the answer is 2. So as you can see, on both sides we have the same answer. So we can say that the third property is actually true, and we can start using it, right? It's the truth. So the fourth property is that this is actually this might not actually be really useful, but I guess the mathematicians, right, they want they want stuff. So this is the fourth property, which states that if you have the absolute value of, let's say, A added to B, if you add A and B and then you take the absolute value, the answer there is always going to be less than or equal to the absolute value of, let's say, we take the absolute value of A individually and B individually and then add them up. Let's see an example of both cases. Now this is going to be the example where the answer is going to be equal. Okay, so let's say we have, and we're going to see why this is. Okay, so in the next example, now let's say we have A is equal to 3 and B is equal to 2. Now let's add 3 and 2. 3 plus 2 is equal to, we're doing the left hand side first. 3 plus 2 is equal to 5. So 5, the absolute value of 5 is going to be equal to what? It's going to be equal to 5. Now let's do the right hand side. Now the absolute value of 3 and the absolute value of 2, they are going to be 3 and 2. Now let's add 3 and 2, and you can actually see that the answer is equal. It isn't greater. In this case it isn't less, but it is equal. And the above statement is still true. Now let's actually do an example where the answer is less than. Okay, it's going to be less than over here. Let's solve the left hand side first. -3 added to 2. -3 added to 2 is equal to -1, and the absolute value of -1 is going to be equal to 1. Okay, let's do the right hand side. The absolute value of -3 is going to be equal to 3, and the absolute value of 2 is going to be equal to 2. So 3 plus 2 is equal to 5, and you can actually see 5 is greater than 1. 5 is greater than 1, and yeah, you can conversely say that 1 is less than 5, but in this case you can actually see when A is actually a negative number, and you can actually say that even B, if B was a negative number, the answer is going to be less than. Like the left hand side is going to be less than the right hand side, right? So this is how I actually determined that if the answer is going to be less, or it's going to be less than or equal to, right? So that is all there is to these were all the 4 properties that you need to know about absolute values to solve most of the problems, and actually to find out some good stuff about them. So I really hope you learned something.